The arrogant ones almost always make the same mistake in the end. They think secrecy is the same thing as control. They think if they remove the visible evidence, they have erased the truth itself. That is how underestimation works in intimate life. One person decides the other is too trusting, too tired, too decent, or too emotionally dependent to follow the pattern all the way to its meaning. And once they make that decision, they stop respecting the intelligence of the person they are betraying. That is when they become careless. Not sloppy in the dramatic sense. Careless in the moral sense. They start editing reality as if the other person's perception were just another household inconvenience to be managed. My husband believed that deleting the messages would save him. He believed because he had always counted on something deeper than technology. He counted on my restraint, my dislike of chaos, my reluctance to become suspicious without proof. He thought those things made me safe to betray. What he forgot was that patience is not blindness. Silence is not surrender. And a man who notices patterns for a living does not stop noticing them simply because the person closest to him sounds calm while lying. The shared tablet didn't ruin his life. His arrogance did. The tablet just happened to preserve the truth long enough for me to stop doubting what I already knew. My name is Owen. I was 46 when my marriage ended, though if I'm being precise, the part that mattered had been dying quietly for much longer than the paperwork suggested. I live outside Phoenix, and at the time this happened I worked as a senior analyst for an energy infrastructure firm. My job had taught me a certain relationship with risk. Not fear of exactly, respect. I spent my days studying data anomalies, maintenance failures, cost overruns, and the quiet little inconsistencies that tend to precede larger problems. I learned early in that work that systems do not collapse from nowhere. They signal first. Often repeatedly. The trouble is that people do not like acting on weak signals, especially when stronger narratives are more comforting. I brought that same instinct into marriage, though with less discipline than I should have. I believed in not overreacting. I believed in giving pressure, fatigue, and the ordinary frictions of adult life room to exist without immediately converting them into judgment. That instinct was not wrong. But without boundaries, good instincts become openings. In the wrong marriage, your fairness becomes one more resource the other person quietly uses against you. My husband, Caleb, was more naturally social than I have ever been. He worked in corporate recruiting, which meant conversation, persuasion, emotional fluency, and the polished art of making strangers feel more visible than they actually were. He was good at it. Good enough that people described him as warm before they described him as anything else. I used to think that was because he was fundamentally kind. Looking back, I think he had simply learned very early that warmth was one of the easiest ways to control emotional pace. When someone makes you feel at ease, you stop evaluating them with the same discipline. That is true in business, friendship, and marriage. We had been together 12 years, married for 9. No children. That was partly by choice, partly by drift, and partly because some conversations get postponed until they harden into identity. We discussed it seriously in the first few years, then less seriously, then in passing, then almost not at all. Careers, timing, travel, uncertainty, all the modern reasons people give themselves when they want the future to remain negotiable. Eventually the question stopped sounding unfinished and started sounding impolite, even to ourselves. I mentioned that because absences shape marriages too, not just dramatic betrayals. The things you never build, never say, never force into daylight. Those absences change the emotional climate, and people eventually start behaving in response to climates they never had the courage to name. From the outside, ours looked stable. Good neighborhood. Clean house. Well-managed finances. The right kind of vacations twice a year if schedules allowed. We knew which wine to bring to other people's homes and how close to stand in photographs. We were the sort of couple people described as solid, which usually means the visible part of the marriage performs competence well enough to discourage curiosity. I was useful in all the invisible ways lawn partnerships require. Bills, repairs, planning, taxes, maintenance, travel details, school donations for nieces and nephews, appointment tracking for both of our parents, all of it. I did not resent that. I took pride in it. Quiet men often do. What we sometimes fail to understand is that the more invisible our labor becomes, the easier it is for other people to treat our steadiness as permanent infrastructure instead of chosen care. If I criticize myself honestly, and I believe any grown man telling a betrayal story should, my central mistake was not that I trusted my husband. Trust is not stupidity. My mistake was that I mistook my emotional discipline for protection. I thought because I wasn't dramatic, I would be harder to manipulate. In reality, I was easier in one very specific way. Caleb knew I would rather question my own reaction than accuse without evidence. He knew I disliked ugly conflict. He knew I believed decent people should not turn every discomfort into a crisis. Those are good traits in the right relationship. In the wrong one, they become perfect cover. The first changes were small enough that I felt embarrassed by them. Caleb began coming home later, which in recruiting was easy to explain. Candidate dinners, networking drinks, hiring managers who wanted one more conversation, airport runs for out-of-town talent. The problem wasn't the late nights alone. It was the emotional texture around them. He used to come home carrying the actual shape of his day. Sorries, irritations. Something absurd an executive said over drinks. A ridiculous candidate. A nervous client. Then those stories thinned out. His days arrived pre-edited, as though the interesting part had already been spent somewhere else. How was dinner? Fine. Did the candidate accept? Not yet. You seem tired. I am. Nothing suspicious there on paper. That is why deceit survives so long in adult life. Each individual detail is too small to justify the ugliness of confrontation. It is only when you stop isolating them and admit the pattern that the truth begins taking shape. Then his tone changed, not harshly at first, more like someone becoming impatient with ordinary forms of emotional access. If I asked what time he thought he'd be back, he might say, I already told you I don't know. If I asked whether we were still seeing my sister for brunch Sunday, you would sigh and say, does everything need to be scheduled down to the minute with you? Small things. But contempt almost always enters as a small thing. If it arrived in its full size immediately, too many decent people would recognize it. I tried to address it before suspicion hardened into anything uglier. One evening we were in the kitchen. I was loading the dishwasher. Caleb was half watching some legal drama and half answering emails on his phone. You felt farther away for a while, I said. He looked up and gave me that expression I came to know too well later, concern mixed with faint disappointment, the face of someone already preparing to cast your discomfort as disproportionate. Farther away how? Emotionally. He set the phone down with exaggerated patience. Oh, and I'm tired. Work has been insane. I know. This feels like more than tired. Then came the line that taught me something important about where the marriage had already gone. What exactly are you asking me? That question sounds innocuous until you understand the tone. He was not inviting clarity. He was challenging the legitimacy of the concern itself. I'm asking if we're okay. He exhaled and gave a small laugh. We're adults. Not every quiet month means the marriage is in crisis. I didn't say crisis. No, he said, but you do this thing where you take temporary strain and make it emotionally symbolic. That line bothered me more than any denial would have. Your position, my perception is my problem. It said, in effect, the issue isn't distance. The issue is your interpretive style. That is how sophisticated betrayal protects itself early. It trains you to distrust your own first response. I let it go because I still believed I was being wise. That is the part I judge in myself now. Not that I failed to see something. That I saw enough to feel uneasy and still chose to protect the marriage atmosphere more than the truth of what I was noticing. The first name that started surfacing too often was Adrian. He was, according to Caleb, a regional talent strategist from another office who was helping with a difficult expansion. Smart, funny, annoying in a harmless way, good with executives. I remember the frequency before I remember the feeling attached to it. Adrian said this. Adrian handled that. Adrian was in town again. Adrian understood this client better than anyone. He became normal too quickly. That matters because hidden people offer an end to the home through repetition before they enter it through proof. I asked about him once lightly while we were folding laundry. You mention him a lot. Caleb smiled. Do I? Yes. Well, he's been attached to half my life for the last month. It would be weird if I didn't. Then he looked at me more closely and asked, why? Are you getting jealous of a coworker now? That is one of the oldest defensive maneuvers there is. You offer the more embarrassing interpretation of someone's observation so that they retreat from the simpler, more accurate one. I let it pass. Again, the shared tablet had been in our kitchen for years. It sat on a stand near the coffee machine and was used for grocery lists, music, recipes, airline check-ins, weather, and sometimes to stream ridiculous home renovation videos while we made dinner. It was ordinary. That's why it mattered. Shared devices are dangerous to dishonest people because they get treated as furniture until suddenly they aren't. The first real fracture came on a Sunday morning. Caleb was in the shower. I was trying to pull up a banana bread recipe because we were supposed to visit his aunt later and I had promised to bring something. When I opened the tablet, it was still synced to his messages because he had used it the night before to send a photo to a friend. The visible thread itself was gone, deleted, but the notification preview had not cleared from the message screen cache. Miss you already. Yesterday was too short. No name, just the number. My body went cold before my mind caught up. I remember standing there in the kitchen with one hand on the counter, looking at that one line and understanding something that felt older than the line itself. This wasn't discovery from nothing. It was alignment. All the quiet signals I had been refusing to name finally clicked into one structure. When he came downstairs, towel around his neck, I asked, who texted that they miss you already? He stopped, just for a second. Then he smiled. What? The text on the tablet. He worked over, looked at the screen, and laughed too easily. That's from Melissa. Melissa? From work. She says that when I leave team dinners early. It's a joke. Why is the thread deleted? It isn't. It isn't on the phone anymore. He picked up the tablet and made a show of checking it. I probably cleaned up old messages last night. Oh, and seriously. There it was again. Not explanation. Diminishment. The issue was not what I saw. It was that I was taking it seriously enough to ask. I'm asking because it matters. No, he said, setting the tablet down. You're asking because you saw one incomplete line and decided to make a story. That used to work on me. It worked because it appealed to the best and worst parts of my character at once. The best part wanted to be fair. The worst part was proud of not becoming suspicious without solid ground. So I said nothing more. Outwardly, Internally, something had changed. Not because I had proof, because I finally understood that he was calmer inside the lie than I was inside my uncertainty. That meant emotional confrontation would serve him more than it served me. The next 2 weeks were a study in calibration. Calib, but warmer, not more honest. More affectionate in passing. More interested in my day. More physically present. He even suggested we plan a long weekend in Santa Barbara once this hiring cycle ends. That's something I wish more people understood. Sudden tenderness after suspicion is not always repair. Often it is simply systems maintenance. The betrayer wants to see whether access still works. Whether influence can still outpace evidence. The actual discovery came because of the very thing he thought would save him, deletion. He deleted the messages on his phone. He deleted the active threads. He was disciplined enough to clear obvious traces. What he forgot was that the shared tablets still synced message fragments into a backed-up notification archive for 3 days before full refresh. I discovered that by accident when I opened the settings to disconnect his number from the tablet entirely and saw the local storage history. There were dozens of fragments. Not enough for a full conversation. Enough for structure. Hotel bar. Last night. He thinks I'm at dinner. Your place next time. Mr. Mel. And one line that ended all remaining ambiguity. Stop deleting so fast. It makes me nervous. That line almost would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. 2 adults trying to manage secrecy with the confidence of people who had already spent months underestimating the person at home. The number matched an unsaved contact in a rideshare receipt archive on his email. Adrian. Of course. That night after he was asleep, I checked the family phone account. The repeated calls. The message volumes. The same windows over and over. I checked his card statements. Hotel charges masked as dining. Local parking. One boutique hotel downtown twice in the same month. The dinner he told me was client networking had ended with a minibar charge at 1:14 a.m. Once you stop protecting the lie becomes startlingly visible. I copied everything. Screenshots. Logs. Receipts. Notification fragments. Then I sat in the dark den until nearly sunrise and asked myself the question that matters more than any confrontation. Do I want to save this, or do I only want the humiliation to stop? The answer was immediate and unpleasant. I wanted the humiliation to stop. That is how I knew the marriage was over even before I said it aloud. The next morning I met with an attorney named Daniel Hurst. After reviewing the file, he asked, "Do you want confrontation first or structure first?" Structure. That was the calmest and most important decision of the entire story. Over the next month, I gathered records, separated finances quietly, reviewed our property documents, and arranged a rental furnished condo owned by a former colleague who spent half the year in Oregon. I moved legal papers first. Then personal things he would not notice. Then the things I knew I'd want within reach if the emotional atmosphere of the house became unbearable too quickly. Meanwhile, Caleb grew more confident. That is what arrogance does once it thinks danger is past. He became less careful, not more. He corrected me more sharply. Rolled his eyes once when I asked whether he'd be home in time for dinner with neighbors. Told me I was obsessed with predictability. One night, standing in the doorway of the den while I reviewed insurance paperwork, he said, "You know what your problem is." I looked up. "You think silence is some kind of virtue. It's just avoidance with better manners." That line stayed with me because it revealed how he had come to see me. Not as a man choosing restraint, as a man too timid to test reality. In his mind, my composure had become an explanation for why he felt safe lying. I said no. The problem is that you've started confusing my restraint with permission. He went very still, just for a second. Then he smiled like he was trying on a version of me he didn't recognize. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not talking to the same man anymore." He laughed, but it was not an easy laugh. The turning point came because of timing, not evidence. The evidence already existed. What changed was my relationship to it. Caleb still believed he was managing a suspicious husband who wanted peace badly enough to keep explaining away discomfort. He had no idea I had already decided peace and truth were no longer living in the same house. I chose to let the truth come out at our home privately, but only after it was structurally too late for him to torque his way back into emotional control. On a Friday evening, after I had signed the condo lease, transferred the security deposit, and moved the last of the essential documents, I asked him to sit down in the kitchen. He looked amused more than concerned. "What now?" he asked. I placed the tablet on the table, opened to the archived fragments. Beside it, the phone log, the hotel receipts, the parking charges, the condo key. His face changed instantly, but not in a guilt first. And a surprise. That mattered, because surprise meant he had never truly believed I would follow the pattern all the way through. "What is this?" he asked. I said, "The part you forgot existed after you deleted the messages." He stared at the screen, then at me. For 1 second, he was actually silent. Then came the sequence I had expected. Privacy, misinterpretation, emotional confusion, claims that it had never become what it looked like. That line, by the way, is the adult liar's anthem. It means exactly nothing and sounds just complicated enough to help the speaker feel morally less cheap. I let him talk for maybe a minute. Then I said, "The messages aren't the point." That stopped him. The point, I said, is that you spent months assuming I was too careful to act, too fair to trust my own instincts, and too committed to our routines to step outside the version of me you were lying to. That was your mistake. I placed a condo key on the table beside the tablet. He looked at it and actually seemed confused. What's that? It's where I'm sleeping tonight. That was a power reversal. Not because I outperformed him, because the truth had been revealed in a language manipulation can't easily reorder, structure. I was no longer asking for honesty. I was presenting consequence. He asked if I was serious. Yes, he said, you're going to throw everything away over this. That sentence interested me because it showed, even then, how badly he still misunderstood what had happened. He thought leaving meant I was discarding our life. In reality, what I was discarding was his version of it. I said no. I'm declining the life you've been living at my expense. He cried then, properly, not performatively. I think in that moment he finally understood that the old arrangement was gone. Not because I no longer loved him in some total way, but because love without respect becomes an administrative problem eventually. He admitted enough to make the legal process simpler and denied enough to preserve whatever remained of his self-image. That is normal. Few people become morally elegant just because they are cornered by evidence. I left that night. The divorce took 8 months. It was not a war, just an exhausted dismantling. The condo became more peaceful than I had expected. That mattered. Solitude can be clarifying when the marriage you left had become a machine for emotional distortion. I realized, slowly, that what I had feared losing wasn't real him. It was the structure of being part of something. The routines. The visible shape. Human beings protect shapes much longer than they protect truth. About a year later, I saw him at an airport in Minneapolis. He was dressed well, still beautiful in the way some men remain beautiful even after they have made themselves morally ordinary. He looked startled to see me. We spoke for maybe 2 minutes. He asked, "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. That surprised him. "I don't hate you," I told him. "I just understand now that deleting evidence and ending dishonesty are not the same thing." He nodded like a man who had already had enough time alone with himself to know that lying was fair. That was the end of it. So if there is a message in this story, it is not that technology reveals everything or that liars are stupid. Many liars are careful. Many are intelligent. The problem is not intelligence. It is arrogance. The moment a person believes your decency makes you safe to betray, they begin making mistakes that are larger than technical ones. They stop respecting the mind of the person they are lying to. They believe deleting the visible trail is enough because they assume the other person still needs them more than truth. He thought deleting the messages would save him. What he forgot was that truth often survives in the very places arrogance stops bothering to check.